Hello there, and welcome to my channel. If this is your first time, welcome. I hope you will enjoy the video currently showing, and please leave your comments below after viewing. If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe to my channel, for there will be more videos to come. And thank you for your interest. Welcome to Warkworth Village in Northumberland. Warkworth Village. Warkworth is a village in Northumberland, England. It is probably best known for its well-preserved medieval castle, church and hermitage. The population of Warkworth was 1,493 in 2001, increasing to 1,574 at the 2011 census. The village is situated in a loop of the River Coquette, about a distance of 1 mile from the Northumberland coast, and lies on the main A1068 road. It is 30 miles north of Newcastle, and about 40 miles south of the Scottish border. An ancient bridge of 2 arches crosses the river at Warkworth, with a fortified gateway on the road mounting to the castle, the site of which is surrounded on 3 sides by the river. Warkworth is popular with visitors for its old buildings, its walks by the River Coquette, and its proximity to the Northumberland coast. An area of outstanding natural beauty, it is twinned with Warkworth, New Zealand, which is named after it. A church has existed on the riverside site, in the village for around 1,200 years. St. Lawrence's Church is a large and almost completely Norman building, which is unique in Northumberland. The first record of the village dates from 737 AD, when King Ceolwulf of Northumbria gave the church and village to the abbot and monks of Lindisfarne. In 1174 the church was the scene of a massacre, when some 300 people were brutally butchered by Duncan, who was the Earl of Fife, during a Scottish raid. Warkworth Castle was founded at an uncertain date. Traditionally, its construction has been ascribed to Prince Henry of Scotland in the mid-12th century. But it may have been built by King Henry II of England, when he took control of England's northern counties. A timber castle was first documented in a charter of 1157 to 1164, when Henry II granted it to Roger Fitz-Richard. However, it was considered feeble, and was left undefended when the Scots invaded in 1173. Roger's son Robert inherited and improved the castle. Robert was a favourite of King John, and hosted him at Warkworth Castle in 1213. The castle remained in the family line, with periods of guardianship when heirs were too young to control their estates. King Edward I stayed overnight in 1292, whereby John de Clavering, who was a descendant of Roger Fitz-Richard, made the crown his inheritor. With the outbreak of the Anglo-Scottish Wars, Edward II invested in castles, including Warkworth, where he funded the strengthening of the garrison in 1319. Twice in 1327 the Scots besieged the castle without success. The castle came to the House of Percy in Edward III's reign, and is still held by their descendants the Dukes of Northumberland, despite some brief changes of ownership in the 15th century. During the 18th century, the castle was allowed to languish. The southwest tower was falling apart, and around 1752, part of the curtain wall, east of the gatehouse, was demolished. It was rebuilt towards the end of the century. The town and its historic ruins were by now attracting interest as a tourist destination, largely due to Bishop Thomas Percy's poem, The Hermit of Warkworth. In the mid-19th century, Hugh Percy, who was the 3rd Duke of Northumberland, undertook some preservation work. His successor Algernon Percy contracted Anthony Salvin to restore the keep. The castle became a scheduled monument in 1915. In 1922, Alan Percy, who was the 8th Duke of Northumberland, granted custodianship of the castle to the Office of Works, which had been made accountable for the guardianship of ancient monuments. The Duke's chambers remained under direct control of the Percys. The Office of Works undertook excavations in the moat in 1924 and removed the custodian from the gatehouse. English Heritage, who now manage and maintain the site, succeeded as the castle's custodians in 1984. In the 20th century, Nikolaus Pevsner said of the imposing castle that the military engineer happened also to be a great architect. He went on to say that Warkworth must be approached from the north, with its bridge tower, then Bridge Street at an angle, joining the main street upper hill to the towering, sharply cut block of the keep. It is one of the most exciting sequences of views one can have in England. Warkworth Railway Station was located approximately 1 mile west of the village. It was designed by Benjamin Green for the Newcastle and Berwick Railway. The station closed to passengers in 1958 and to goods traffic in 1962. Due to Warkworth's popularity, the village caters for large numbers of visitors throughout the year. Facilities include 2 pubs, 2 hotels, a number of cafes, restaurants and tea rooms, a chocolate shop and patisserie, a general store, and several galleries and boutiques. Governance. Warkworth is a major part of the electoral ward called Amble West, with Warkworth. This ward stretches south to Acklington via Amble, with a total population at the 2011 census of 4,172. Sport. The village is host to Warkworth Cricket Club, which was formed in 1874. The first 11 team plays in the Northumberland Cricket League and has reached the last 16 of the National Village Cup during several occasions in the past 20 years and is a regular contender for the Northumberland League title, winning 3 years running in 2001 and 2003. The second 11 play in the Anakin District Cricket League. The junior section has over 60 members participating in under 9-year-old competitions and under 11 with 13 and 15 leagues. Notable people of Warkworth village. Rawdon Briggs. Rawdon Briggs lived between the 30th of December 1853 to the 21st of August 1936, was an English first-class cricketer and clergyman. Being the son of Rawdon Briggs Sr., he was born in December 1853 at Warkworth, in Northumberland. He was educated at Winchester College before going up to St John's College, in Oxford. While studying at Oxford, Briggs played first-class cricket for Oxford University in 1874 and 1875, making 10 appearances. He scored 342 runs in his 10 first-class matches, at an average of 21.37, and with a highest score of 71. After graduating from Oxford, he took holy orders in the Anglican Church. He was the Canon of All Saints in Bradford from 1877 to 82, and was the vicar there from 1882. In August 1936, Rawdon Briggs sadly died at Bedford. Other notable people: Sir Henry Percy, a late medieval English nobleman. Sir Henry Percy lived between the 20th of May 1364 and the 21st of July 1403. was known by his nickname Hotspur or Harry Hotspur, was an English knight who fought in several campaigns against the Scots in the northern border and against the French in the 100 Years' War. The nickname Hotspur was given to him by the Scots as a tribute to his speed in advance and readiness to attack. The heir to a leading noble family in northern England, Hotspur was one of the earliest and prime movers behind the deposition of King Richard II in favour of Henry Bolingbroke in 1399. He later fell out with the new regime and rebelled, but later was slain at the Battle of Shrewsbury in 1403 at the height of his fame. Church of St. Lawrence, Warkworth. The Church of St. Lawrence is situated in the village of Warkworth in Northumberland. It is a Grade 1 listed building within the Diocese of Newcastle and dedicated to Lawrence of Rome. History of the Church of St. Lawrence in Warkworth. St. Lawrence Church stands overlooking the River Coquette at the north end of the beautiful village of Warkworth. The main road through the village bypasses the church as it stands at the head of the marketplace. If you are travelling north, you will see the church ahead of you, and to your left as you descend Castle Street from Warkworth Castle, but if travelling south there is every chance you might overlook it altogether. St. Lawrence Church is extremely attractive, and built like much of the rest of the village, in a light honey-coloured stone. It is the largest and most complete Norman church to have survived in Northumberland, though its origins go back considerably further. The first reference to St. Lawrence Church was in 737, when along with the surrounding estates, then known as Wersuode, it was among the properties granted by King Ceolwulf of Northumbria to the monastery on Lindisfarne when he abdicated his crown to become a monk there. It seems likely that at that time the church was built from wood, and very unlikely that it survived the Viking raids of the late 800s, at least one of which in 875. Which laid waste to much of Northumbria. After a landing on the banks of the River Coquette, only a short distance downstream from Warkworth. Repairs seem to have been completed fairly quickly, and the remains of stone foundations dating back to the end of the 800s or the early 900s have been found under the existing chancel arch. Work on a buttress against the north wall of the nave in 2008 revealed traces of a structure, which might have been a side chapel of this early church. Henry I gave the income from St. Lawrence Church, along with that from a number of other churches in the area to his chaplain, Richard de Vae, and this subsequently passed to the Diocese of Carlisle. The narrow nave and the chancel of the church you see today date back to a rebuild in the 1130s. The tower at the west end was added in about the 12th century, and the belfry and spire are added to the top in the 1300s. The south aisle, which is nearly as broad as the nave, largely completed the structure of the church as you see it today in the 1400s, though some of the windows were added in the 1800s. The Vikings were not the only raiders to have made a mark on Warkworth. On Saturday the 13th of July 1174, a Scottish army led by Duncan the Earl of Fife attacked and destroyed the village and massacred 300 villagers, who had gathered for protection in the church. The Jacobite army that arrived in 1715 had slightly less disastrous consequences for the village. On Sunday the 9th of October 1715, The service in St. Lawrence Church was taken by the chaplain of James Francis Edward Stuart, the Pretender. The service was followed by a rather premature proclamation of James III as King of England in the marketplace. Another notable visitor was John Wesley, who preached in the church in May of the year 1761. For a church with such a very long history, the churchyard at St. Lawrence is home to surprisingly few grave markers and monuments. A notable exception is the box tomb located to the east of the path, linking the main gate and the door of the church. This is known as the Huntsman's Tomb, which is the last resting place of Edward Dodsworth, who was the huntsman to King James I and VI, who died on the 30th of May 1630. A little further round the church, in the angle between the end of the south aisle and the chancel, are 3 medieval stone coffins, which originally were discovered beneath the church floor. On the north side of the church, you can see the original wall of the nave, supported by massive buttresses intended to prevent the building moving on shallow foundations built on sand. Originally built in the 1200s and 1300s, the pending threat of collapse of the north wall meant that in 2008, 2 had to be replaced and built on 22 meters deep piles and extending all the way down to the bedrock. The interior of the church is as attractive as its exterior, though the fact that the aisle is almost as wide as the nave, it can be a little confusing. There are many fascinating details to be appreciated, and it really is worth buying a copy of the guidebook to make the most of your visit. Two points are particularly worth looking out for. The chancel arch stands on the site of the altar of the Saxon church and represents a continuous history of Christian worship, extending back nearly 13 centuries. Not far from the main entrance is the knight's tomb, which is a superbly carved and preserved effigy of a knight dating back to about 1330. The inscription on the base of the tomb, which dates back to the 1600s, says it is the effigy of Sir Hugh of Morwick. But this may be an error, as the arms on the knight's shield are those of the de Aubly family of Durham. Warkworth Castle, northeast England, does many things rather well, and one of them is castles. There are dramatic coastal castles, like Dunstanburgh and Bamborough, grand castles like Alnwick, frontier castle, like Norham, and castles you can stay in, like Langley Castle. Once a favourite residence of the powerful Percy family, Warkworth is no gaunt border stronghold, built purely for defense, but an elaborate and sophisticated building designed to impress visitors and surround its owners with luxury. Situated on a loop in the River Coquette about a mile from the sea, the castle is in a natural defensive position, overlooking and dominating the large, bustling, attractive village of Warkworth. The foundation of Warkworth Castle. The date and circumstances of the castle's foundation remain unclear. There was probably a residence belonging to the Anglo-Saxon Earls of Northumbria at Warkworth, before the Norman conquest of 1066. Henry, son of David I, King of Scotland, has conventionally been credited with raising the motte and bailey, which is an artificial mound surrounded by a fortified enclosure, and the first stone buildings at Warkworth, after he became Earl of Northumberland in 1139. The first written record of Warkworth Castle, however, occurs in a charter between 1157 and 1164, in which Henry II granted the castle and the manor of Warkworth to Roger Fitz-Eustace. The castle may have been built in the 1150s to consolidate Henry II's repossession of Northumberland in 1157, an action that led to the building of similar motte and bailey castles nearby, such as Harbottle. Alternatively, the charter may have simply dignified the ancient residence at the centre of the manor of Warkworth with the title of a castle. The old castle walls and towers appear powerfully and mysteriously attractive along the side of the road to your left as you enter the village from the south. Come at it from the north, and you cross a modern bridge next to Warkworth's medieval bridge, built in 1379, and believed to be the only remaining fortified bridge in England. The early development of Warkworth Castle. Roger Fitz-Eustace's son, Robert Fitz-Roger, was almost certainly responsible for the present castle at Warkworth between 1199 and 1214. Many features visible today can be associated with this period, including the gatehouse, Carrickfergus Tower, Postern Gate and East Curtain Wall, and possibly the spur walls rising up the motte. These last suggest that the present Great Tower replaced an earlier stone structure. From the late 13th century, castles such as Warkworth, they began to play an increasingly important role in the long-running war between England and Scotland. As a result, royal funds were directed towards the construction and maintenance of private fortresses. In 1323 the king ordered the defences of the castle to be prepared, and in 1327 it was besieged by the Scots. Warkworth is a Saxon name derived from Wersiorth, meaning the enclosure or a homestead of a man called Wers. Whatever Wers's place consisted of, it was given to the monks of Lindisfarne in 737 AD, during the reign of the King of Northumbria, who was called Ceolwulf, and included the forerunner of the present parish church, St. Lawrence's. The castle is first mentioned in the 12th century, but there is some debate as to whether it was built in the 1140s by Henry the Duke of Northumberland or the son of King David I of Scotland, or by Roger Fitz-Eustace, who was granted Warkworth sometime between 1157 and 1164 by the King of England, Henry II. Either way, it was not much of a castle, because when Northumberland was invaded by the Scottish King William the Lion, who was David I's grandson, in 1173, its defences were described as feeble. They can't have been any better the following year, when the unfortunate population of Warkworth is said to have been massacred by the Earl of Fife. It is believed the first substantial castle at Warkworth was constructed by Roger Fitz-Eustace's son, who was called Robert, during the late 12th and early 13th centuries. King John visited Robert at Warkworth in 1213, so we assume it must have had reasonable accommodation for his royal nastiness. It is probable that Robert's son John and his successors carried out further building work by the time the Scottish Wars of Independence had kicked off in the 1290s, where Warkworth had become a notable fortress. The castle might have played an important part in the defence of Northumberland, when in the aftermath of the English defeat at Bannockburn in 1314, this led to northern England to be prone to Scottish attack. Indeed, the Scots did besiege the castle in 1227 unsuccessfully, but they still managed to sack the unlucky village again in 1341. Warkworth Castle's heyday actually came after it was acquired by the Percys in 1328. The Percy family has been part of Britain's history since the time of the conquest, sometimes taking centre stage, sometimes a supporting role. It was far and away the most powerful dynasty in the north of England during the medieval period. The later Percys. The sixth Earl, Henry Percy from 1502 to 1537, undertook several documented repairs, including the reconstruction of the wall between the gatehouse and the Montague Tower in 1534, and the clearance of the incomplete church. As he had no heirs, the castle again passed to the crown, but by 1550, it was described as rapidly falling into decay for want of basic maintenance. When the sixth Earl's nephew, Thomas Percy from 1528 to 1572, was given control of the family estates and restored to the title in 1557. A survey of 1567 provides the most detailed account of the medieval buildings, which may have been carried out to help plan a substantial reordering of the castle. Before the work could be completed, the seventh Earl was involved in the unsuccessful Rising of the North in 1569, that sought to re-establish Roman Catholicism in England. He was later executed in York, while Sir John Forster, warden of the March and the border region between England and Scotland, took advantage of his office to pillage the castle. A survey and inventory conducted in 1574, after Elizabeth I had returned Warkworth to the Percys, shows that parts of the castle were by then falling into decay. What repair was undertaken is not clear, but when the ninth Earl Henry Percy from 1564 to 1632 came into possession of Warkworth in 1585, some rooms were clearly habitable. The ninth Earl was later arrested and imprisoned owing to his links to one of the conspirators in the Gunpowder Plot of 1605. The castle was then leased to Sir Ralph Grey, who let the buildings deteriorate further. In 1648, during the Civil War, parliamentarian forces installed a garrison, and when the soldiers withdrew, they removed doors and iron, so that the castle could not be held in war. Possibly they're the ones who reduced the bailey to its present condition. The rise and rebellion of the Percys. In 1332 the castle passed to Henry Percy, 2nd Lord Percy, who had been granted it by Edward III. At that time the Percy family was emerging as one of the most important in the north of England. The castle and barony of Alnwick remained the Percys' chief holding in Northumberland throughout the Middle Ages, but Warkworth Castle was their favoured residence until the 17th century. Neither the 2nd nor the 3rd Lord Percy did much work to the castle, but Henry Percy, from 1341 to 1408, and 1st Earl of Northumberland transformed it. He was the first great landowner in the north to get a noble title, and he almost certainly celebrated this by building the Great Tower. It is also likely that he established the hermitage at Warkworth. The first Earl played an active role in deposing Richard II in 1399, but he and his eldest son, known as Harry Hotspur, from 1364 to 1403, soon quarrelled with Henry IV, the king they had put on the throne in Richard's place. Hotspur was killed at the Battle of Shrewsbury in 1403. After the Earl joined an unsuccessful conspiracy in 1405, Henry IV marched north and laid siege to Warkworth with cannons, by forcing its quick surrender. The Wars of the Roses. With the Percys disgraced, the family's lands passed to the crown. But Henry V restored the son of Harry Hotspur, who was another Henry Percy from 1393 to 1455, to the family inheritance and earldom in 1416. The second Earl is known to have undertaken building work at the castle, although it is not now clear what this was. In the Wars of the Roses, the 2nd and 3rd Earls supported the Lancastrian cause of Henry VI but were killed at the battles of St. Albans in 1455 and Towton in 1461 respectively. Warkworth was then occupied as the Yorkist headquarters. From there the Earl of Warwick and leader of the Yorkist forces supervised the sieges of Alnwick and Bamburgh along with Dunstanburgh Castle, which remained centres of Lancastrian resistance. In 1470–71, Edward IV restored the eldest son of the 3rd Earl to his inheritance and title. The heraldic decoration on the Lion Tower shows that after his marriage in 1472, the 4th Earl Henry, who lived from 1449 to 1489, began the complete remodelling of the bailey. He also planned a new collegiate church in the castle, but this was abandoned after he was murdered in 1489. The Bailey. Around the bailey below the Great Tower are buildings dating from about the 12th century to the 16th century. Lion Tower and the Hall Range. The Lion Tower was built as the main porch to the New Bailey residence, created by the 4th Earl of Northumberland around 1480. Its impressive display of heraldic sculpture, including the Great Lion of the Percys, celebrated his dynastic prowess. Within the residence are the Great Hall, where the whole household ate, and the withdrawing chambers for the head of the household. The Great Hall was essentially a 15th century remodeling of an earlier hall of about 1200. To the right of the Lion Tower entrance lay the kitchen, buttery and pantry. How the hall range functioned, in conjunction with the similar set of rooms, in the Great Tower is not clear. The Earls probably used the Great Tower rooms for shorter visits, and the Bailey buildings for longer periods of residence with their larger household. The Little Stair Tower, with its distinctive spire, was a secondary porch to the hall range. It was partly rebuilt in the 1920s. Collegiate Church. Running across the Bailey at the foot of the moat are the foundations of a church. It seems likely that it was begun by the 4th Earl as part of his reorganization of the castle in the 1480s, but was abandoned and finished after his murder in 1489. Today's Duke of Northumberland is a Percy, and lives in the nearby Alnwick Castle. This enormous medieval structure stands at the town north end of the castle, where a huge stone-carved Percy lion looks down on the main street known as Castle Street, just in case anyone forgets who's in charge. Apparently, the lion indicates the location of the Earl's bedchamber. It cannot have occurred to the builders that technology would eventually make this into an obvious target, or maybe they did. The Great Tower is cruciform in plan, with a ground floor, accessible via outer stairs with portcullis entrance, and 2 upper floors. Inside, it is a wonderful labyrinth of corridors, rooms and stairways. The ground floor was mainly used for storage, but even there are hints at past luxury and wealth. A large stone staircase leads to the 1st floor, with its reception area, great hall, chapel and kitchen. The 2nd floor was largely accommodation. Towering overall, there was a viewing tower providing an uninterrupted 360-degree vista for miles over the surrounding countryside, including the River Coquette and the nearby coast. As well as being impressive, Warkworth's Great Tower is still, in many ways, a beautiful building, with delicate Gothic tracery in the windows, sophisticated drainage and even a light well. Henry, the 1st Earl, was supremely well connected, being close to John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster and 3rd son of King Edward III, until the two fell out. Henry played a part in the coup that replaced King Richard II with Richard's cousin Henry IV, but then quarrelled with the new king. The Earl's son, Harry Hotspur, immortalized by Shakespeare, led a rebel army against Henry and was killed at the Battle of Shrewsbury in 1403. Indeed, Shakespeare refers to Warkworth in Henry IV Part 2. This worm eaten, hold of ragged stone, where Hotspur's father, Old Northumberland, lies crafty sick. Old Northumberland the Earl was arrested after Hotspur's death, but the family managed to hang on to his estates until Percy rebelled again in 1405, and the king seized Warkworth. Nevertheless, his son, Henry V, restored the Percy fortunes and the family were prominent Lancastrian supporters. During the Wars of the Roses, the 2nd Earl died at the First Battle of St. Albans in 1455, and the 3rd Earl at Townley in 1461. The great rivals of the Percys were the Nevilles, who at this time supported the Yorkist cause. Warkworth Castle was taken by the Yorkists in 1462 and used as a headquarters by Richard Neville, who at the time was the Earl of Warwick, known as the Kingmaker, while he systematically smashed Lancastrian resistance at Alnwick. Along with Bamborough and Dunstanburgh, the 4th Earl had ambitious plans for Warkworth, developing a whole suite of buildings or range in the southwest corner of the Bailey. These included another great hall, great chamber, kitchen, chapel and service rooms. public access was through a magnificent tower known as the Lion Tower, on which fabulous family heraldic devices were mounted. Even in their sorry-eroded state, they exude authority. Originally, they would have been brightly painted. The population of the castle at this point would have been a large one. Records from just after this, at the time of the 5th Earl in the early 16th century, show he had 166 permanent members of household staff, including practical tradesmen like painters, joiners and grooms, as well as more frivolous employees like singers and minstrels. The 4th Earl also appears to have begun building a church inside the bailey, though it was never finished. Its curious squat outline and crypt which divide the interior of the castle, with a covered passage connecting the bailey and Great Tower. It was an ambitious project, and would have looked dazzling if the vision had been realized. However, Henry was murdered in 1489, allegedly by a mob for the sin of not committing his forces to support King Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485, thereby contributing to Henry Tudor's successful grab of the throne. The Percys were staunch Catholics at a time when this was an unhealthy pastime. Sir Thomas Percy, brother of the 6th Earl, was executed in 1536 for his part in the Pilgrimage of Grace, a northern rising against Henry VIII's suppression of the monasteries. The 7th Earl was involved in the revolt of the Northern Earls against Elizabeth I in 1569. Warkworth was seized by the Queen's forces and pillaged by the Earl. Having been imprisoned by the Scots and sold to Elizabeth, was executed. The 9th Earl was imprisoned and fined for possible links with the gunpowder plotters of 1605. Abandoned by the Percys as a prime residence from the 17th century, Warkworth Castle's story is a familiar one, including decline and destruction, then a tourist attraction with an option to be painted by Turner, followed by partial restoration. And finally, its renewed life as a modern heritage attraction. By the time James I and VI visited Warkworth in 1617, the castle was in a terrible state, with livestock being kept in the buildings. Even so, the Royalists occupied it during the Civil War of 1642 and 48, but it was surrendered to the Scots in 1644, and then garrisoned by parliamentary troops in 1648. The parliamentary troops removed fittings when they left, so that the castle could not be easily refortified. Later that century, it was plundered for building materials to put up a new house for one of the Percy's estate officers. During its early tourist attraction phase in the 18th century, Warkworth Castle was indeed painted by Turner. Some attempt at restoration was then made in the 19th century, when the site was cleared and the 4th Duke Algernon Percy, from 1792 to 1865, commissioned the architect Anthony Salvin to repair part of the Great Tower, creating a suite known as the Duke's Rooms. The rooms were maintained to be used by the family for outings well into the 20th century. However, they are now open to the public. Curtain wall, towers and gatehouse. Surrounding the bailey is the curtain wall, parts of which date from the early 13th century. The Carrickfergus Tower, at the southwest angle, also dates from the same period. The Grey Mare's Tail Tower of the 1290s and the Montague Tower, probably mid-15th century, may have provided accommodation for the Earl's household. The gatehouse, built about the 12th century, comprises a pair of polygonal towers with buttresses of the same form at each corner. The Great Tower. The Great Tower, which stands on top of the moat, was commissioned by Henry Percy, after he was made first Earl of Northumberland in 1377. It is in the shape of a Greek cross, with 4 polygonal wings radiating from a central block, above which rises a viewing tower. On all 3 stories the rooms are arranged around a central open light well. The varying size and ornament of the external windows indicate the importance of the rooms they light. Around the entrance hall on the ground floor is a warren of vaulted service and storage chambers. These were connected directly by narrow stairs to the first floor rooms, which include the buttery for storing and serving beer, main kitchen, great hall, great chamber and chapel. The corbels in the walls show that the chapel had an upper floor, where the Earl could perform his devotions in private. Fireplaces and wall sockets indicate the level of the second floor upper chambers. In the 1850s, the renowned architect Anthony Salvin repaired the roof on one corner of the tower to create 2 furnished chambers on the second floor, now known as the Duke's Rooms. The revival of Warkworth. In about 1752, the wall between the Montague Tower and the gatehouse was demolished and the stone was used to build cottages. But despite its ruinous state, the castle, together with the hermitage, became an attraction for tourists. Interest increased with the publication of Bishop Percy's popular poem, The Hermit of Warkworth. In 1771, the Percys began again to take an active interest in the property. The demolished castle wall was rebuilt, probably in the late 18th century, and clearance of the site began, with substantial excavations in the 1850s and 1890s. The fourth Duke of Northumberland was Algernon Percy, from 1792 to 1865. Employed the renowned architect Anthony Salvin to restore the Great Tower. The intention was apparently to restore the whole tower, but the work done between 1853 and 1858 was limited. External stone was replaced where necessary, and 2 upper chambers, known as the Duke's Rooms, were given new floors and roofs. The Duke's Rooms were maintained for the use of the Duke and Duchess of Northumberland, who would bring guests from Alnwick Castle for picnics in the summer. In 1915, the castle was declared a scheduled ancient monument, and in 1922 was taken into state guardianship. The Duke's Rooms, however, remained under the control of the Percy family until 1987. Castle Hermitage. The hermitage was created by the Earls of Northumberland, who hired a priest to live in the cave-like dwelling and say prayers in the chapel hewn from the rock. Rather than a secluded dwelling for a religious recluse or hermit, it was in fact probably a chantry, or private chapel where a priest performed services. The chapel, with 3 vaulted bays, was carved directly out of the rock. To the right of the altar is a cluster of worn sculptures, forming an almost life-size nativity scene. The inner chamber was probably a closet from which the Earl and his retinue could view the service, as there are viewing slits and windows cut in the wall adjoining the chapel. The history of the hermitage. The first hermit recorded was Thomas Barker, who was appointed chaplain of the chantry in Sunderland Park for life in 1497 by the 4th Earl of Northumberland, where Thomas Barker celebrated Mass in the Hermitage Chapel. It seems very likely, however, that there was a hermit in residence much earlier, perhaps as early as 1400 at the time of the first Earl. Despite the name, the hermitage was more accurately a chantry, a form of private chapel, and the hermit was actually a priest hired by the Earl to say prayers for the souls of the Earl and his family. Contrast this to a traditional hermitage, which is the retreat of a holy man or woman who seeks out a life of contemplation for their own spiritual welfare. The first hermitage was laid out with a chapel, sacristy and porch, with living quarters for the hermit to the west. The chapel chamber is composed of 3 vaulted bays carved directly into the rock face. At one end is an altar also carved from the solid rock. This is thought to be the only altar in Northumberland not to be defaced during the religious turmoil of the Reformation in the 16th century. In the window bay to the right of the altar is the highlight, a series of sculptures probably meant to depict a nativity. The figures are almost life-sized, and though worn by erosion are still very striking, being a bit hard to see in the dim interior of the chapel. There are more carvings over the sacristy door and over the porch. Above the inner door is a figure of Christ on the cross flanked by St. John and the Virgin Mary. Over the sacristy doorway is a shield bearing the symbols of the Passion. The chapel is about 19 feet long, 7 feet high and 7 feet wide. The sacristy is a much simpler chamber with a plain arched roof. There are 2 stone cupboards set into the north wall and the fragmentary remains of a screen at the west end of the chamber. There are traces of a doorway at the west end of the south wall. Beyond the chapel is an inner chamber with viewing slits cut through the rock wall. These slits, or windows, would allow anyone in the chamber to see what happens at the altar. It would seem likely that the Earl and his entourage would watch the priest's religious service from the inner chamber. The duties of the hermit changed over time. By the late 15th century, he was essentially a tenant and farmer, with secular as well as religious duties. More comfortable accommodation was erected between the original hermitage and the riverbank. By comparison to the rock-built chambers, these new quarters were almost luxuries, with a hall, kitchen, and upper chamber. These 15th century rooms now stand roofless, but are quite atmospheric and very easy to explore. The outer wall still stands to a height of 4 meters or 13 feet, with remains of a chimney breast and a window opening. In the kitchen area you can see the remains of an oven. To the right side of the chapel, a set of stone-cut steps led up through a tunnel to an area on top of the cliff that was used by the hermit as a kitchen garden. Getting to the hermitage. The hermitage can only be reached by boat. You can get a ticket from the English Heritage counter at Warkworth Castle. You then have a half-mile walk along the footpath by the River Coquette to a landing stage. There an English Heritage staff member will row you to the far bank and allow time ashore to explore the hermitage before rowing you back. The river current is slow enough to allow a safe trip. It is always a good idea to check the English Heritage website for opening times, but do be aware that weather conditions on the day may make the river impassable. The hermitage is well worth making a special effort to see. The atmosphere is amazing. You can't help but wonder what life would have been like for the early hermits. If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe to my channel. I hope you will come back again, as more videos will be uploaded soon. And thank you for your interest.